So last time we got as far as getting our foam on our stool, but today we're going to finish, put another finish on the wood of the legs to give them a better finish, and we're going to fix some fabric and trimming onto the stool itself. But first of all, I'll show you what we're going to do to get these legs really nice and smooth and polished. Last time we were here, we put some shellac sealer onto this bare wood after rubbing them down. It would be better to have another coat of shellac on them, and so in order to get a really nice finish, you can feel that they are a lot better than last time. They're smoother, but they can be better than this, and I think another coat wouldn't hurt to seal it before we polish it. So you wipe it almost in the direction of the grain, and when you've done it you can feel it's really smooth, and a sort of white dust comes off, which is the shellac that is actually just coming off. And what you should be doing is you should be leaving the shellac in the grain of the wood. So we're not going to rub this too hard to actually remove everything, but we want to really leave the shellac filling the grain, and that leaves it quite smooth. Now, as you can see, I've finished rubbing down the whole of this wood very lightly, and you can see the white powder that's come from the shellac. And it's very important, as you can see there's bits of powder in on my lining, it's very important that you get rid of all of that dust and any remnants of the wire wool that may have come off, because as we spoke before, we don't want any dust or any rough areas beneath the surface of the shellac, because the surface that you start with will give you your good finish. So one of the things I like to do is vacuum out all of the crevices and any corners that there may be on the wood. So now I'm going to vacuum that out. And then, just to make doubly sure that we have removed every particle of dust, do you remember our tack rag? I'll just find a nice clean area on our tack rag, slightly sticky. Now this isn't a hard rub because you don't want to transfer that stickiness from your tack rag onto the wood, but just pick up any small amounts of remnants of the dust that might be left in the wood. The next job is to put some shellac on. Now don't forget to actually vacuum also the surface, or if you've got a separate cover on, to remove it, and now you're into a clean surface. So make sure that that area is clean as well. So shake up your shellac, and then in a container, there's an old chipped cup. You just want a very small amount. So again, working very fast around your legs or your wood. And don't forget, it's only a very small amount on this brush. Certainly I've not dipped my brush all the way in. I'm just making sure it picks some up and then wiping it around the side. So I'm now going to go round the rest of the base of my frame, and when I get to a leg, then I'm going to treat the leg again. I've now finished shellacking my legs, and not my legs, the legs of the stool of course, and I've cleaned my brush in methylated spirits and then washed it thoroughly in a soap washing up liquid will be fine, and hot water. If you've got one of these brushes, you know that they're not the cheapest brush you can buy, they're the best brush you can buy for this job. But you do want to look after it. It will last you, the last one I had of these with quite continuous use lasted me 15 years. And as we said before, all I've done is finished wash my brush, and these are touch dry, not a problem at all. They'll need time to harden off, but there's not a problem with them, I can carry on working. So now I'm deciding what to put between my fabric and the foam. It's not a good idea to put fabric straight on foam. Apart from the fact that it doesn't feel very nice, it feels like a lump of foam with fabric on it. The foam can damage the fabric, and the lack of protection for the foam means the foam won't last very long. Now, there's several things you can put between, and one of those is polyester. This is just a 2-ounce polyester wrap. Foam will rot through exposure to UVA, and also dust will help to rot it. And this will help to keep both of those out of it. So it feels better, it protects the foam, and the foam will last much longer. Now, as I said, polyester is one thing you can use. I quite personally like to use skin wadding, and this we sell in packets or by the metre. And it's a mixture of wool and cotton, and it has a much nicer feel to it, a much better feel. It also covers up more of your sins underneath, gives you a much smoother finish. So I do like to use this, so this is what I'm going to use today. So first of all, I need to know my measurements. Never just lay it over and cut it around. You're going to get it wrong, it's going to slip, you're going to cut it in the wrong place. So measure what you need. And remember, it's only from the edge to the other end. As you see, I've written down my sizes here. Make sure you do write them down, because by the time you've gone from your piece of work to the cutting table, you will have forgotten, or you'll think you remember and you'll cut it wrong. So write it down. And then the best thing to use on a cutting table is a flat ruler. If you use this type, they stretch. You might be wanting a very precise measurement, and these stretch, they curl as they go on, or you can pull it. But this is much more precise, and of course you can draw lines with it. So I'll just make sure that the last time it's been cut, it's square, and as you can see there's a little nick out of it there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that. So this is 21 inches in that direction, and then this way is 25. I'm old fashioned and I'm still in inches, but as you see I did measure it in centimetres, so it's 54 and 64. And then I'm going to cut that up. So there's my skin wadding, which just wants laying over. Make sure it comes to the edges all around. And smooth it into place. You don't want anywhere for it to overlap, because it will create a lump. So if you actually cut that up the corners, I'm going to cut it. If you've got legs like this that meet the wood, I would cut this just short of those legs, because when I start pressing it to pull down my fabric, you can see it actually will go down a bit further, and there's nothing to stop us cutting a bit more off later. So I'd always just leave it with a little allowance, and then you can cut more of it. It's not fixed, this will just lay on there before my fabric. So we're now ready to put our fabric on. Now there are lots of choices of fabrics. Stripes are very fashionable at the moment, wide stripes, narrow stripes, very colourful, wide stripes with lots of colours. you may want an overall pattern. Now I've decided to use none of those fabrics today. The fabric I'm going to use is in fact a type of vinyl, and these days the vinyls are so realistic that really it's a job to tell something's not leather. This particular one is a sort of worn leather look. So as I'm intending, I think, to use some nice upholstery nails, the ones with the nice heads, brass heads and that, I think this one will work really, really well. It's quite neutral, so that's what I'm going to use. Now, if you're going to put this fabric on, just make sure that it hasn't got any bigger. We were quite precise. It's just over 21, so I'm going to, it's not really made a lot of difference actually. So if I measure just a bit more, and 25. I'm going to use some tailor's chalk here. I want a nice sharp edge to draw my line, so I'm using a chalk sharpener to get a nice edge on it. Now if you remember, this is my selvage, either end. My weft is going this way, which is from weft to right across my body if I'm sitting in a chair, and these are the ends. So our length in that way from side to side was 25 inches, and our depth that way was 21, or 54 centimetres. And this is where you can see it's important to get this edge straight, because, which I can see we haven't got, there we go, because I'm now going to measure up and mark it in a few places along here so that I can get a nice straight line. And don't think it's just, well, what I'll do is I'll just cut a raggedy piece and I'll put it on, because you're more likely to get this on straight and get an even amount over the whole area if you cut a straight line to start with. Now ready to cut this piece out. So now you can see these electric scissors, which I've demonstrated in the past. This is quite thick, and yet it's cut that perfectly simply. I'm a bit arthritic, and scissors actually I don't like using, so that's very, very quick. Now if you remember, we marked our centres on the stool. We marked with a pencil mark on the sides in the centre and front and back on the centre, and that will help us centre a pattern. If we've got a pattern with a stripe going right through the middle, or a flower we wanted in the middle, we need to make sure that is exactly in the middle. So the easiest way to do that is to fold your piece of fabric in half and do a little nick. Now it is a little tiny nick, it's very, very small, just enough to be able to see it. We don't want great big man-size V's. Now if I were using a fabric that frayed or something like that, I would have to be turning this under at the edges, so I would need this slightly bigger. But this fabric in fact finishes quite nicely with a nice smooth edge, it doesn't fray, and so I'm going to be able to take that to the edge of my stool. So when you put it on, those little nicks should match every pencil mark going all the way round. You can see there's a pencil mark there, and it will match it going all the way round the stool. Now I want to do a nice nail finish on my stool, If this was going to be a fabric that frayed, a fabric with a fraying edge, if I were going to put a braid on it, it wouldn't matter to bring it to the edge like that, because you glue the braid on, it seals the edge, not a problem. If I wanted to put a nail edge on it, then, and it frayed, I would have to turn that in very slightly to bring it to the edge. But this one doesn't fray. And I'm hoping to put a nail finish on here, which we'll have a look at in a minute. Okay, I could staple this on the edge. I mean, I want to conceal it with my nails afterwards. And as you see, I'm thinking of using a nail trim. And there's very little space to actually cover any staples that I use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use gimp pins, because I might get this wrong. If I staple it and it's wrong, it's very difficult. If a more experienced upholsterer doesn't have a problem stapling immediately, because he's pretty sure he's not going to take them out, but if you've got to dig staples out, you do a lot of damage. So if you can see, this is a brown gimp pin. It's a tack that's a brown tack with a very, very small head, but it's been painted brown. So I'm going to use these, and even then I'm not going to knock them home until I'm sure I've got everything right. So I'm going to do what you call temporary tacking. I'm going to knock them halfway in. I'm not going to use less tacks than I need, but I am going to not knock them home, which means they're temporary tacks. So starting from the middle and working to the outside, just knocking them part way in, just enough to hold it in place. If I'm using braid, one of the things I will do is I will cut a small piece of the braid off that I'm going to use, and I'll just check as I'm putting these in that I'm putting it within the area of the braid, so that the braid will actually cover up my gimp pins. So I'm just getting as far as the edges of my legs, and then turning the stool around. Always turn your piece of work to you, don't try and get around the piece of work, turn it to you. And then, again, matching my mark, I'm putting pressure on, and I'm using what they call the upholsterer's left hand to drag it with pressure over the area and smooth it. If you just pull using your fingers like this, you will actually end up with little pulls in it, and it will only pull in place in those areas. If you pull and push the whole thing around, you're pulling an area, a length of it under your hand. You can then put tacks in, or in this case gimp pins, into a length, putting it round again. If it comes, you know, I've measured this pretty precise, but if to pull that it came over a bit more, to get that nice and tight, because the secret of good upholstery is getting it nice and tight, is not having it go floppy after it's been on there a week and then someone sits on it and it really looks terrible. So I'm carrying on, and I'll do the same this side. I'll bring it up to each leg, and then I'll do the same at the ends. As you can see now, I've got my, I don't know if you can see them, brown on brown, I hope so. I've got all the way round, I've taken tacks from the centre into the legs. Now there's several different types of, at least 2 different types of corners that I could do. I could do one single fold and take that, I'm crumpling it round a bit, but I'm taking that round to the edge end of my stool and I'd have a straight opening. But I feel that this particular fabric and style of stool, rounded legs, the stuff itself looks very much like leather. So I want that type of corner, which is a round corner. I think it would suit the rounded legs. So make your decisions based on the fabric, the shape of the piece that you're doing. If it's a rounded corner chair, a round corner is right. If it's a very square looking chair or stool, then a square corner is correct. So pull down the centre piece of fabric, you can see it there, and I'm going to just cut up to the corner to give that some relief. As you can see there. And you'll notice that when I'm cutting on my work, I'm cutting with small scissors. Bring it down quite firmly on that corner. And then I'm getting a gimp pin in that side. And I'm going to have to knock those two home. Make sure they are home. Get into the habit of just feeling with your finger to make sure there's nothing sticking out, because that'll either tear the fabric, allow the fabric to tear away, or you'll feel it through the next layer. I want them to actually meet at the bottom. But to do that, there's quite a lot of fabric in this fold and it's almost not allowing me to do that. Plus, thick fabrics create bulk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut, if you remember from that centre cut, to cut that away. I can trim it better with a knife later. And then I'm going to cut up into that V. Now don't go too far, you don't want it to show where it gets narrower at the top. And then I'm going to cut it out. And that, as you can see, has relieved it somewhat. I hope you can see that well. And then I can fold it under a little more to make that meet nicely in the middle. Pull it fairly tight. How much you cut out depends on how much your fabric frays, how thick it is, how much you really need to cut out. Two would secure that nicely there. There. Now I'm going to trim that round with a knife later, and then I'm going to do the same with this side. So when I've knocked those home, I'll trim that round with a knife. And I've got the other four corners to do now. As you can see, I've now got all of my gimp pins in and all of my corners in place. I've pretty much got this the right length around here, and where it isn't, I can trim it quite nicely with scissors to the edge. But on top of the legs, I need a knife. Now we do a J.A. Milton knife, which is a very heavy duty knife with snap-off blades, so as it gets blunt you can snap off another one. But do be careful, they're very sharp. If you've got a ledge that you can push that into to cut round rather than cut straight, it's much better. And we've got a ledge in there. So I'm going to cut the corners right up to the legs, and there is a groove in there, and as this knife is very sharp, you can see I can cut round all of my legs quite neatly. This is a powder coated nail. As you can see, it's got quite a thick coating on it, and this one actually has a bit of a glint to it. This is one of the larger ones. They come in smaller sizes, and bigger sizes, and that's the latest type of nail that you can get. Very attractive, comes in blues, blacks, silvers, many different colours. Another powder coated finish. This is a smaller one, but as you can see it's a dull finish. There's no glitter or glint to that, which in the right place looks extremely nice. This is one of our old favourites, a Renaissance nail, which is shiny in the middle. That can come in strips as well, and I'll show you how strips are used in a moment. Individual nails and strips. However, today, as we're doing a video for a simple stool, I decided that the easiest thing for you to use is a nail that's on a strip. Now, if you look at this, every so often there is a nail missing, just a blank and a hole, and this is where you would take one of the real nails and put it in every so often to hold it in place. Now you'll notice that I've not knocked these gimp pins home, and I've done that for a reason. Don't start, by the way, with that on the corner, it'll give you problems. Start by taking it round the corner like this. Now if one of these gimp pins lands exactly where I want one of my fixing nails, or indeed like this one, which is probably going to show if I knock that home, it gives me a chance to just move them slightly before I knock them home. Test where I'm going to put them and move them if necessary. This one on the end, as we remember, is too high. So I need to pull it out. And put it back in slightly lower down. And by just checking that, remember to feel the tops at their home. Now, hopefully, when I put my trimming in place, none of them will be in the way. Take one of my blanks, place it in the hole, now I can start to fix that as I go along, and I'll just check as I go before I knock these gimp pins home that they're not going to be just where I need to put a fixing nail. So the trimming is now on the stool, and I think you'll agree it does look rather nice. There's one last thing to do, which I could have done before I put the fabric on, but I don't think I'm going to disturb very much. If it will white the fabric, I might think twice. But I'd like to put some polish on the legs. Now, I have in fact put a little polish on this one, and you can see it's shining quite well. I could rub them down once more with wire wool, but I feel they're about right. So make up your own mind with that. I'm going to use Fide's Supreme polish, which is a finishing polish. You can use this on your furniture continuously. And I'm going to use one with a slight colour, because I just feel that, I know I've polished that one, just a slight, to make that slightly darker might be quite nice. So it's just a case, very, very simple. I'm just going to apply this slight, it's got a slight colour to it. I could use a clear one, but I'm going to use this colour. because I'd quite like to just influence a little bit. And it's very simple to use. It's just a case of spreading it on, and then you just wait until that dulls off a little. And when it starts to dull down, you can then give it a good, don't leave it on there too long because it will eat into your shellac, but if you give it a bit of a buff, like that, it just gives it a bit more protection, brings it up a little. I really do like it when the legs show the grain of the wood and very slightly different colours, because wood is not uniform, and as they're real wood, that's what we want to see. And that's our finished stool, and it's got its bottoming on. We can see underneath if any of your family or friends pick it up. They can see how nicely it's finished underneath, and I do think that's important, and it's got a nice trimming on it. And don't forget, this particular stool we're going to put on our website very soon now, and it will be available for sale. And we can also make some to order for you. So if you have your own fabric, we can use your fabric, or we can make them to order with our fabric here.